appreciate everyone joining us today for our Reboot Virtual Cancer Center Grand Rounds. This is our third week of our restart, and we've been really very privileged to have in succession three innovators, each in their own discipline, who have taken unique and novel approaches to inform biology, clinical care, and science. And I think, as I say, today's speaker, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Harlan Krumholz, who is no exception to that spirit of innovation. Dr. Krumholz is the Harold Hines Professor of Medicine and Epidemiology and Public Health at the Yale School of Medicine and Yale School of Public Health. And beyond being a trained cardiologist, he is the director of the Yale Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation, or CORE. And through his career, Dr. Krumholz has been someone who has leveraged unique clinical and registry databases in order to inform how we can improve patient care, patient quality, clinical decision-making, and ultimately healthcare delivery to improve outcomes, reduce disparities, and ultimately improve the way in which we provide care and conduct clinical research. As a leader in this field, Dr. Krumholz has been elected as a member of the Association of American Physicians, the American Society of Clinical Investigation, and the National Academy of Medicine. And we're really pleased to hear from Harlan about his unique approach and how it's informing today the way we conduct clinical care and clinical investigation. So Harlan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Charlie. And it's a great pleasure to be asked. It's nice to have a cardiologist be asked to oncology grand rounds. Can you see the slides? Are we all set?
Yeah.
Screen share? Yep, great. So, and Charlie and I went to medical school together, so we've known each other actually a long time, though we don't cross paths as much as probably we'd like to here because we're both so busy, but it's really nice to be invited. And I thought I would just have a conversation with the group, talk a little bit about some of the things that are on my mind about what I think we can do better in research. And maybe some of that you'll find relevant to the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of aspirations you have for the place that Yale should be in setting the pace and generating knowledge. I'm a cardiologist, but really I suppose I'm an expert in knowledge generation, in how to do research and the kind of research that can make a difference. Our group and I've never measured our success by publications, but more by impact, and have sought to use science to make a difference. And I think you'll get a sense of that as we go. Sorry. Okay. I've been on a million Zooms, but I haven't done a grand rounds yet. So I'll just hold my disclosures for a second. The Hugo Health one will be obvious. Refactor Health, not really so much in this. And you should just know I'm biased towards questioning the wisdom of the way we usually do things. So just a word about CORE. I started CORE soon after I came to Yale more than 20 years ago. And the way it worked was I sort of had this sense that I needed to create a center of gravity, a group that would be interested in impact, trying to use different tools of clinical research to accelerate our progress, to improve the quality of our care, to help us get better information, to make clinical decisions, to help guide policy. And I wasn't quite sure how to do that. And I went to the university and said, you know, what if we created a center? At that time, I didn't even know really what a center was. Sort of probably thought it was, you know, getting a group of people together or just a center of gravity. And of course, I was sort of dismissed. I've been on faculty just a couple of years, and I learned that the Yale Corporation had to approve centers, that actually was a special word at Yale, and that I had really asked something that was far beyond what they could grant. So I went to the hospital and I said, well, I'd like to start a center. And they said, okay. I said, well, what do I have to do? They said, I don't know, call yourself a center. So that was really the origin story of the Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation. We started with just a couple people and tried to figure out how to do work that was consequential and where could we direct our attention in ways that would really be, in the end, pragmatically oriented, so that the science that we generated would actually be measured in the benefit on people's lives. Beginning my career, when I was going around, I don't know how this stands in oncology, but in cardiology, They can't figure out who you are if you can't define yourself by either a procedure or some sub-segment of a disease condition within the specialty. So either you're a heart failure person, or you're an acute care person, or you're an arrhythmia person, or you're an echo person, or you're a nuclear cardiology person. Like you can't really just walk in and say, well, I have broad interests and want to improve the entire spectrum of care that we're providing. And I want to be able to feed in the knowledge that we need, because it seems to me like we're quite ignorant in a lot of areas. And so ultimately I stumbled on this word outcomes research, which was really not about studies having outcomes, but about a focus on the end result of what we do, and to try to determine at the end of the day whether we've actually improved the lives of people that we're caring for, and whether the policies we implement are actually at the end of the day having a beneficial difference. And so, it had been a word that had been coined about a decade before, fallen out of use. And I don't know, I just discovered it in reading an article that John Eisenberg and Carolyn Clancy had written, and started using it. And I used it to deflect the attempts to make my research more reductionist and allow myself to be able to be more horizontally integrated than vertically integrated, and to be able to stretch across questions so that I could even answer questions in oncology and no one would say, what the hell is he doing over here? And then I think that sort of ended up defining my career. I'm a cardiologist, love cardiology. It's where my focus has been, but a lot of my work has been across the spectrum of medicine, because if I see something where there is an opportunity to advance the field and can meaningfully improve the lives of patients, then I don't want to feel constrained. And in the end, it sort of has worked out. CORE is a group of about 150 people now. We have CMS contracts helping to architect the quality system. We work with CMMI around developing metrics for their programs. We have a small footprint now with the VA, working with the IT and integration and quality side of that. We work with ACC, and we're spreading out to others with regard to their usual registries. We work with the FDA through the Center of Excellence program, the CERSI, around regulatory science. A couple years ago with Wade Schultz, who's remarkable, we founded a Center for Computational Health within CORE. We have the Yale Open Data Access initiative that we have that is around open science, sharing clinical trials. We share all of Johnson & Johnson's clinical trials. You just have to put in a proposal and ask for them, and you can get access to them. And we try to be a proponent of open science throughout. We were part of the founding partners for medRxiv, which now is being used quite avidly. And you can see, so it's a wide spectrum. And then the ... are regular grants that we would usually put in by normal mechanisms. But we found a path where we could be strategic partners with groups that have broad reach and have big impact, and have tried to work together with them, not to get their data, but to work in partnership to try to help shape the future. And I would say that our work is in the clinical science realm. I fashion it as being basic, translational, and applied. And so some of what I'm going to talk about today is mostly around basic research of clinical research. How are we doing the basic underlying work to improve the mechanics of clinical research so that we can go better, faster, cheaper, so that we can actually generate the kind of knowledge that we need? We're very interested in that translation then from those basic tools into information that can be useful. And then on the applied side with implementation science, we're very interested in seeing that then put in a way that can be used. Now, I show a COVID map here because, I think this has reset everything. It's reset our way, our thinking about almost every aspect of clinical care, but also on the research side, and has exposed the frailties within our research system, our inability to mount rapid research projects, to be able to do rapid cycle knowledge generation. And I spend a lot of my days now trying to stand up such projects, to work in collaboration with people around the country to try to learn quickly, and around the world. But it's exposed, I think, this gap between what we really need to know, the speed with which we need to know it, and our ability to generate it. And so this has become, I think, also a chance for us to rethink the way that we do things, and whether it makes sense. Even the funding mechanisms, as you can see, have adapted to this situation. But why should they be any less responsive to cancer or heart disease? I mean, people, and there is a sort of mantra among many patient groups: we're not waiting. people, speed, time matters for everybody. And it's not just in a COVID world. And my hope is that we'll be able to translate this mentality and approach more broadly, because ultimately we've got inadequate information around us. I'm really proud of cardiology. We've done so many trials, so much research. We've produced so much knowledge. And yet when you look at our guidelines, the vast majority of them are still either based on expert opinion or on flawed, weak studies. The number of studies that are strong are quite small. And then when you get to the point of being able to make precise estimates for individuals, we're hampered completely. Almost all of our strong evidence is about average results in diverse populations that were underpowered to give us any information about how to tailor that for individuals. And so I look with admiration and envy to the oncology community, because you often have a disease that is a lock and key. I mean, there's a point mutation, or there's a set of problems that for which you can be more precise in your prescription. We have complex diseases with multifactorial causes. You, like we, have also social determinants, a lot of other factors that can influence outcomes. But we've got to generate knowledge at a faster clip in order to be able to do this. The need is really rapid knowledge generation for actionable insights, so that we can really move things forward in a way. And I wrote this about 5 years ago, and I like it because to me it frames the issue that I began to focus a lot of my attention on. And that was the medical research enterprise is inadequate to keep up with the information needs of patients, caregivers, clinicians, administrators, and policymakers. And we can't continue to address this just by saying, let's put in another grant. We have to be able to think, there needs to be a grand strategy. We need to be able to think about this in a global fashion in order to think about what are the choke points? How can we learn faster and better? And how can we in turn be able to make this able for us to do more actionable research? Some people have talked about this as we need to move from a hunter-gatherer society where we get an idea and then we go out and hunt down the study, and then we bring back the answer. But then when we've got the next idea, we have to rebuild the entire effort again the next day in order to do it, to one of industrial farming, where what we're doing is planting seeds throughout, and we're routinely collecting the information we need and producing the insights that are necessary. I mean, people are dying because we are going too slow in the research enterprise, not just because of ideas. Actually, there are a lot of ideas, and not just because of candidates. There's actually a lot of candidates that stay on the shelf because it's just too damn hard and too damn expensive to really test them, or test them again, or test them in different populations. And that's our fault. That's our fault. We need to reconceptualize exactly how this all can work. If it goes again to my premise here that medicine is an information science. And so we increasingly need to figure out, how do we move data and information and translate it into insight, and then do it again and again and again and again, faster and faster and better and better. And when we're training students, we're not training them to memorize things anymore. We're training them to be able to process that as the information comes up. How can they leverage it? How can it make them better? And by the way, this information science idea is never going to replace the humanity of medicine. It should strengthen us within the context of medicine. We should be asking ourselves repetitively, what is research in the modern era? What have we do to contribute to actually making the conveyor belt move faster, better, and be able to better serve the needs of our patients? So, I come back to this, it's like, when I look at these tech companies, I say, like, with every purchase on Amazon, every search on Google, every mile driven on Tesla, they get smarter. I mean, the real equity within Tesla isn't actually the hardware. It's what they've learned in the process of people driving the cars. Same thing for Google. I mean, the equity within Google is the fact that with every search, they get smarter. They're running A/B testing all the time. By the way, you do a search 5 minutes later, it's a different search for two reasons. One is they might be testing you behind the scenes, but two, because they're getting smarter. Now, maybe imperceptible 5 minutes later, but they're taking the experience of everyone in order to make your experience better. Same on Amazon. Amazon doesn't sort of make a decision. Let's see, you're 50 years old and you're a woman, so I'm going to predict what kind of shoes you want. They're not doing that. They're taking the experience of the entire group of people who've ever used Amazon. They're taking your entire experience, and then they're trying to customize recommendations based on that. They're trying to be very precise in what they recommend. Now, I get it. The stakes with Amazon, if they make a wrong choice, or in Google on a wrong search, Tesla, I don't know, could be a bigger consequence depending if we go to self-driving. But the the idea though here is the same, which is they're contributing to a collective wisdom. It's not that if I'm an expert searcher, the more gray hair I've got, the more years I've been on Google, the better off I am. People walk down the hall to ask me questions about their Google searches because I've been doing it longer than they have. And they, you know, they want to know what do I think if I have a search that looks just like this. They don't. They, you know, but the fact that we're still, not adequately empowering people at the front lines with a collective wisdom from the experience of all the doctors, not just the doctor. You know, you don't just accumulate experience and knowledge through years, but your experiences are contributing to what we all know in a way that's responsive and agile and precise. That's a shame. You know, we see these autonomous cars. The interesting thing about them is they don't all individually learn. You know, they're connected in the same way to a collective wisdom. And by the way, when they're driving, they're communicating with each other in ways that are getting them smarter in real time. And we should be learning from that. Meanwhile, what do we do with technology? I like this. You know, this was a riff off of this famous painting. But if for anything, technology has made our lives more difficult, has made lives of our patients more difficult in many respects because of what it's done to us. And we've rarely gleaned, you know, the real insights from the data in ways that we think that we're so much better off. In large parts, we're practicing medicine much like they have since the 1950s. It's just we're walking around with computers and our eyes are glued to we're the documenters now. We're doing all sorts of tasks for billing. But with regard to the work process and the way in which we're elevated, sure, there's some tools, up to date, other things, you know, that are better than textbooks that were routinely published in longer intervals, but not in the way that we really can bring back a computational phenotype of the individual in front of us and be able to get assistance that make our lives better, easier. We feel more empowered, better performers, and our patients have a better experience. You know, so I like this when Gawande sort of took a swipe at this, and in this New Yorker article, and he says, I've come to feel that a system that promised to increase my mastery over my work has instead increased my work's mastery over me. And I think that's what a common experience is. So, and this is a lot about clinical care, but it's also about research, because part of my premise is we got to stop this notion that research sits over here and clinical care sits over here. They're in totally different camps. This issue, by the way, hampers both, but we've got to be able to find a way to bring the enterprises together and for us to learn seamlessly in the course of everyday practice. I do think there's a paper with Rob Califf, and Peter Warwick is now a heart failure specialist at the Brigham at the VA, but was a cardiology fellow at the time. But, you know, I think it's possible to bring all of this together, and that the digital transformation can actually not distance us from our patients, not hamper us in our tasks, not weigh us down by the tedium, but rather ultimately we need to be stretching towards how does it actually revitalize the patient-clinician relationship and enhance our performance. I mean, if you just look at the sports world, they're using technology, computers, automation in ways that are helping them train better, be more savvy about their strategies and what they do, and increase the possibility that they can win. I mean, you know, in sports, the investment's being made to say that, you know, no good athlete is saying, I wouldn't want to even get near technology because I just don't believe it's necessary. Everyone wants to give themselves every single advantage they can. This is the spirit that we need to translate to medicine, but we need to know what we're optimizing. We're not optimizing speed and we're not optimizing revenue. We need to be optimizing performance and experience, ours and our patients. And the reason ours is important is because if our experience is lousy, it will affect the patients. We need to make it so that it brings us together, not apart, and it enhances the interactions, not degrades them. We said in here that we believe this has the potential to make healthcare more humane and personalized. I mean, the path towards precision medicine actually, in my mind, is all about math and application. And it's not about strictly genomics. In oncology, genomics does play a huge role. But ultimately, there are many determinants of outcomes. And what's right for any given individual. And so we need to understand the trade-offs. We need to be able to monitor the impacts, and we need to be able to be adaptive in our approach so that we can course correct as necessary in partnership with our patients. And I think that's really possible in this world, but we've got to push for the innovation. And I'll just say another thing, because it's just another bias of mine, which is, and we need not defer to big tech. Big tech was largely built on a surveillance capitalism approach. It has values and approaches that at least at its inception were not aligned with what medicine is all about. Now, they have a possibility within groups, and they have many good people that I have deep respect for working with them now, as employees. And maybe they can make a course correct in this lane. But we have to be thoughtful about this, and academia's got a unique role to play, because we have no allegiance to stockholders' returns. We may get pressure about revenues, but the truth is we are standing firm as advocates for patients. And that's why we are where we are, because we want to be able to promote their best interests. And ultimately, there's no other group that is in as strong a position to advocate for those interests than we are. So, I just put this up because I think we need to be louder about how everyone experiences things. That, when Apple creates new products, I mean, they've got it now. So if you get a new iPad, you can be up and running in minutes. It's a pleasurable experience, and they personalize it for you. Yeah, I get it. We're not a consumer product, and they're making big margins on every one of these pieces of hardware. Plus, they get you into a big ecosystem with a network externality, and they're making money hand over fist. But the philosophy of trying to please the customer, of trying to make sure that we're looking through their eyes and building designs that are suitable for them at the same time that they're generating knowledge and improving the care and getting the outcomes, things that maybe they can't see as well. All of this needs to come together, and we need to be strong advocates to be able to transform the way in which we're working in that respect. When I go back to the research, I'd say, what are the properties of this new research era? And part of this is what do I think in the COVID era that we need to be able to do? When we get ideas, we need rapid deployment. That we need timely, fit for use data. That is, data can't trickle in over time. We need to, as soon as it's available, we need to get it. It needs to be fit for use. I'm going to get onto this. It needs to be participant centric. We need to be trustworthy. Anything we do should be low burden. It should be standards based and have a flexible approach so it can cross over institutions and be used broadly. And when it's shared in an open science construct, other people can pick it up easily. It needs to be efficient and affordable and reusable. So I'm just going to try to touch briefly on issues around patients, pipelines, and plumbing, because these are the things that are on my mind about this. And I'll just say, first of all, I'm strongly biased toward this idea that we should be treating patients as participants. Get rid of the notion of subjects, chasing down subjects, making sure subjects are compliant, make sure we don't lose them. They're not ours to own. We would be entirely better served by seeing them as a community that work with us. When we see our patients, and this is just a public photo from UCSF, but I thought, I look in her eyes and I think that, this is someone who we shouldn't be studying them, doing things to them. We should be working with her. We should be enlisting her. She should be motivated because she trusts us and knows that we're trying to work on her behalf. And if we can't help her, we want to be sure that the next person that faces this situation is better off than she was. I think the philosophy should be that participants should be part of the team, involved, engaged, and respected with agency over their data. It may seem strange to start this when I was really starting to go in a technology direction, but I'm saying this has got to be the North Star in this, so you don't lose this in the course of changing. Now, there are lots of examples of this. Nick Wadle at Broad, I think has done a nice job. I was up there, gave a talk, met with all of them around the Count Me In. This is really the patient-partnered research changing the future of cancer, but they still don't have large numbers of people, and I still don't think they're doing it as efficiently as they could. And even though they've got a lot of money from Emerson Collective and they've got support from different, and the Biden folks work with them and so forth, I don't think it's spread as much as it should and could. And I think we should be champions for things like this. We should be standing up our own. And this is, I think, a remarkable example of what can happen. Also, on a different note with patients, I do think that all our studies should be incorporating patient-reported outcomes. And, these outcomes are continuous, they're meaningful, they can give you important answers in shorter amounts of time, and they can complement a lot of the other information from events and so forth that we're looking for. And we should be incorporating them. But more than that, again, this idea of bringing together research and clinical, I believe that they're vitally important in the clinical enterprise. These kinds of instruments were really an innovation in the medical history. Instead of me asking questions in the morning and then 3 weeks later, you asking a question in the afternoon, by our inflections, by our body language, and by just the words we used, non-standard, we're getting a different impression. Gets anchored in the chart. Next person, third person sees it. Was that a change? Was it the same? What happened? Even if I ask questions in the morning and afternoon, they may be different. Why aren't we using instruments standardized in every case in a way to be able to track and guide our approach? We know that also that patient self-reports of symptoms and clinician ratings are often different. This is a nice article that about a decade ago, but there's lots of articles like it. The interesting thing about it was that the clinicians and the patients often differ in their rating of the symptoms, but actually both of their impressions were predictive. They were picking up on something. The results here showed weak agreement between patient and clinical ratings, and that both ratings separately can make a positive contribution to predictive accuracy. They were reporting differently about how the patient was feeling, but actually both their answers were predictive. So they're both picking up something, but the clinicians weren't picking up exactly what the patients were feeling. What the patients were feeling were also predictive. This is a research letter that just was in JAMA Oncology last month, and it was just showing the difference between standardized collection of data and data that was from the clinicians. And, some of which the clinicians were reporting more often than the patients, some patients reporting more often than the clinicians. But it just shows you that why aren't we using, I think of these as assays. You don't sit there and take a urine sample and taste it and say, that tastes like it's got sugar in it. We have tests of that. So, when we're trying to get the patient, not that you would taste it, I just had to say that, but if you were going to do this with patients, why wouldn't you do it? Plus, I always go back to Ethan Bosch's research letter, which I thought was nice, which was that even the fact of measuring these patient-reported outcome measures and tracking them seems to be able to have a salutary effect on even survival. Now, people can quibble with this, but it's a benign intervention, and it certainly makes sense to me that if we can have early detection of issues, then we can be more responsive to patient needs. But it'll also serve the patient research infrastructure. By the way, not everything you get from patients is necessarily going to be accurate. And this is a paper that we just have accepted because we're very interested in this issue, which is how much can you depend on patients to report events? And actually, we had a very well constructed observational study of patients with heart attacks. And then we interviewed them at 1 month, 6 months, and 12 months. And we had a broader net of getting medical records than you might usually do in a study. And what we found was that, so we had 1,086 hospitalizations from 639 participants. 31% were underreported. So even when you ask people at a month, were you hospitalized? If you go back and capture all the hospitalizations by lots of other different methods, a third of them weren't reported. And these range from 20 to 50% based on the patient characteristics. And that was true as early as a month. So I put this in here to say that we're interested in the patient's perspective, but studies that are depending on self-report for endpoints, that is endpoints like hospitalizations, need to be thinking that there might be a need to do other things. And you can handle over-reporting with adjudication, but you can't handle under-reporting that way. And it's a problem. Again, telling us we need to be thinking differently. For the pipelines, this leads into the issue of the pipelines, which is, why are we depending on patients to self-report? Shouldn't we be connected to the healthcare utilization data? And wouldn't that tell us in real time what was going on to people? And wouldn't that be more accurate than just depending on people answering questions? So can we leverage real world data that's out there? And this just gets into my philosophy. This is something I wrote in Health Affairs too long ago in 2014, and unfortunately it's all still relevant, which is the essence of a truly learning healthcare system will be its ability to learn from daily experience. So the notion that we are able to take data that's being generated, whether it's healthcare utilization for endpoints or any of a different sort of range of information, be able to put it to use without having to spend the time of the usual brute force approach, or being able to leverage it in large scale ways, should be an opening for us in part of this new era. We're only a decade into the digitization of American medicine, and yet, and I think it's a prime time to move on this, but you would have thought maybe we would have moved a little bit earlier. And there's an ample amount of real world data sources that are out there, but we're still just scratching the surface. So I would hazard to guess that 99.9% of the data that's generated isn't really optimally leveraged for knowledge in ways that it could be. Now, sure, yeah, somebody will pull together all the Medicare data and you could say, yeah, everyone in the country's contributed that, but that's just the thinnest layer of information about these people. And we're not really digging in ways that are meaningful. I show this picture of Sanjay, who I've known since he was a medical student here, and I think is an extraordinarily talented person in the therapeutic radiology. But he set up a lab that's thinking about this, that one of the best places that we have existing data are in images. And he's doing a lot of thinking about imaging biomarkers and trying to leverage the images themselves for more information that might be perceived by the human eye to help us guide discussions about prognosis and decisions about therapeutics. And this is what I'm saying is that, how do we begin to leverage it? But he can only do that if we, at scale, begin to organize the images and then be able to tag them and link them, and it's not just the images in isolation, but it's the images enriched by information about the clinical scenario and what happens to people. And we need to be able to build these up, which I'm going to talk about more in the pipelines. But this is the kind of work that needs to be done. My own work, I began to starting to work with groups that are trying to pool large existing databases around the world and seeing whether or not we can apply new ways of doing observational research so that we can avoid p-hacking and a lot of the things that have bedeviled and led us to doubt the validity of observational studies. And this group was made up of a large number of expert methodologists. And I had the privilege of working with them now I'm working with them on several different things. This is one where we said, well, let's combine data from almost 5 million people and try to do head-to-head comparisons of antihypertensive drugs. Turns out we really don't have that information, particularly in contemporary populations and in large-scale subgroups. So, we did 4.9 million patients. We generated 22,000 calibrated propensity score adjusted hazard ratios and compared all classes and outcomes across databases. And we did so using methods that were extraordinarily robust. First of all, we had true open science, all study artifacts, including the pre-specified study protocol, the analytic code, full results, all publicly available. Anyone wants to look at any of that, they can. The databases we have, some of them you need to purchase to get access, but they're all could be available to people. And then we reported all the study diagnostics. We did things to make sure that we were comparing reasonably with people, with groups that where there was empirical equipoise. Sometimes these observational studies are comparing groups that are just entirely different from each other, throwing it into a multivariable model and have tremendous covariate imbalance. And they're violating basic principles, and then making large scale conclusions. And then we had a large set of falsification hypotheses, control outcomes, and tried to account for all the systematic error. So I think this is going to be some of the new wave of this, really leveraging data that exists and using advanced observational methods and open science to show that you've not just looked at one hypothesis within this, but you've varied your assumptions and your sensitivity analysis. You said, if I look at it 22,000 ways, what is in the end do I come up with? not whether one of those analyses ends up being a paper with some kind of result. We're leveraging the records also for looking at extreme patients with blood pressures and trying to automate this. Won't have time to go into this, but just to say, if you go into the record, you can begin to automate the identification of patients who are falling through the cracks, and you can begin to look at different trajectories and pathways. And we're thinking a lot about analytics. This is the state of the art in AFib risk stratification right now, the CHADS-VASc score, where we're basically giving people points for various comorbidities, but we're not making any distinction about the severity of those comorbidities. This is insane. This is like historical. And yet we're really unable to give people some precise estimates. Meanwhile, we're working now increasingly using machine learning techniques. And in this case, we're working with American College of Cardiology, doing comparative effectiveness across different techniques and trying to do a fair amount of feature engineering and advanced modeling to see whether or not we can improve models. Also looking at things like, well, what if you take into account the amount of contrast they got during the cath, and how does their pre-procedural risk then change in dynamic time based on the amount of contrast that they received? And so that somebody could make a very precise decision about whether another injection of contrast is worth it, given what it's going to mean in terms of the risk of AKI. And we tried to create visualizations that would make this easy for people. If you have low risk, more, as only a slight increased absolute risk, we want to be able to make this so each individual patient can have this kind of idea. And then so these ideas are an analytic platform for real-time clinical analytics. By the way, I just want to say one word about this notion of real-world data versus this protocolized data. Sometimes people make this false dichotomy about this is just about observational. That real-world data can feed into trials. It can be the outcomes for trials. So it's not really talking about what the design is. It's just saying, are you going to utilize data that you can stream in almost real time? Can you organize it in ways that can make it useful for the study? You can have real-world data with protocolized data being added to it. And so it's not really. And so when you get someone like Roy Collins and Rich Pito, who I have a lot of respect for, but they want to just slap down real-world work, they're really not talking about real-world evidence. They're talking about, because that can include pragmatic trials, in my opinion, but they're, I think, conflating this idea of where some of the data come from with what the overarching design is. It experimental or observational? And by the way, I still believe observational, well done, has a role for us. So we'll see. And when you look, by the way, these endpoints coming in, this is a paper that was published out of Friends of Cancer Research, and Amy Abernathy's on it, who, as you know, is in a position to really move the FDA in meaningful ways around how these kind of data are used. And it is showing that real-world endpoints are generally consistent with each other and with outcomes in clinical trials, that we can hook into digital data in ways that can inform us and make our clinical trials more efficient. And so, this is what we should be thinking about. I just get the last thing here is on the plumbing, because I want to leave time for questions. So this is the promise of it, right? So I'm saying, first of all, actually, I was taking it all out of technology and saying, I really think these partnership ideas, the way we work with patients as participants, people as participants in our projects, as teammates, is important. And the second one, I was trying to talk about these pipelines of knowledge generation. How can we both descriptive and analytic and prescriptive? How are we going to start to be able to build these pipelines that come out so that we can make use of large-scale databases that can provide insights, apply either experimental or observational designs, elevate the quality of those designs, and be able to rely on that evidence to a greater extent than we have in the past. And now just the plumbing, can we actually feed in the data that we need to make this meaningful? I throw this Flatiron thing just because a lot of you know my feelings about this, that, when I want to get data, if I want to work on cancer research at Yale, I got to go through the IRB, I've got to beg and plead, got to get consents often, or if I'm using the retrospective, I still have to do that. Hey, I think it's great. That's what we should do. If I form a business and have a business associate agreement and sell something to the cancer center and tell you that by selling that to you, I need to get access to all your data, I got to put a server inside your firewall and I got to suck out all your data every day in order to provide this service for you, then I can do whatever I want with that data. I can sell that data to Pfizer. Actually, that's what Flatiron's done, Roche did. So, they de-identify it. There's no such thing as de-identification anymore. So, I mean, there's this kind of two-tier process that's going on. And so, Smilo just decides they're going to send all the stuff to Roche every day. Fine. But I want to see the academic world stand up and not just do that. You can do whatever you want with your data, but you should also be the leaders in this area, not just say that we're going to ship it out to other companies or IT vendors or providing services and let them do whatever they want with it, including sell it. But we need to be at the forefront of this. And when I looked at this, I said, well, yeah, we've got a lot of people who come through our doors and we could be leveraging a lot of the good work, but a lot of it still, we're not harvesting. Actually, we got a melanoma registry that's been going for a long time. I was working with Katie Leitenberg, a resident in dermatology, terrific, spent her research time really looking carefully at what she could glean out of the registry. It's made a lot of advances, but she told me that not one paper has actually been written out of melanoma registry since it started. And, again, we need to be thinking, how do we take the work that's being done here? How do we strengthen it? And that's not to criticize. It's only to say that it stands as a potential source of insight. And it's not really being empowered by the EHR in the way that it could. I also think we need to move away from this idea of case report forms because they're by necessity reductionist. And this is just an example of like our CATH, it's one of the best registries in the world, the ACC registry, but like a lot of our questions are crazy reductionist, so that it doesn't show here, but one of them was dyslipidemia, yes or no. And, so you take highly complex, nuanced information from the record, and then we end up making it so that we can't actually tell the difference between people who are actually different. I've said you could look at people with the same responses on a case report form, stick them in the corner of the room and you put a clinician in front of them and they wouldn't agree that they're all the same. They would think that they're very different because our variables are so crude and reductionist. Now, I think we can do better. Now, I just want to tell you that, we've got a remarkable system here at Yale New Haven, and I really credit Wade Schultz. He's a generational talent. He's remarkable. He's in lab medicine, faculty member who's just a brilliant MD PhD with a PhD in cancer biology, but has, in addition, is just a remarkable software architect and has given us a really amazing platform here at Yale. And it's in the end, it's about pulling data together from different sources and putting it on a Hadoop server network that has embedded a couple of NVIDIA servers with GPUs so that machine learning can take place on it. And this stuff is also translating it into common data models like OMOP, and it's doing it in almost real time. So that even if you wanted to create decision support, it's outside of Epic, it's in a data lake. We have agency over it. You do anything in Epic, they own it. This is an environment where decision support tools can be made and pushed back to the front line and tested. And it provides almost unlimited capacity for different kinds of things. And so there's also clinical modeling pipeline that's been built within this that Baycal is we call the data lake, and HDFS are really the distributed compute with the Hadoop server models. But we've got supercomputer capability here and the ability to have links to data in ways that I don't think another health system in the country has. You can build predictive platforms that can be then tested, and the data can then stream back in as it's coming through. So just because I'm getting close here. So, what about other models? There are people who don't just go here, they go other places. They have wearables, they have payers and pharmacies. There's data all around. And this is, many of you know something that I've been working on for some time, which is how do we get that data in? And I believe for a long time that the model is one of a participant-mediated sharing with the automated collection, curation, and sharing of siloed records without the need for agreements with health systems, involvement of IT, and bureaucratic delay, leveraging on people's federal rights to access their data bringing it together, organizing it, making it so they can forward it into studies in a Sync for Science approach. And Hugo is, you know, what I have put together, but this is, let's talk just about the concept, which is that people are connected to their clinical records, to their pharmacies, to payers. You can push surveys to them. You can bring in their device and wearables. All that data comes in and is normalized and harmonized in an account that they have agency over. They can actually see, and then they can authorize sharing into studies. So in real time, all their data that's being generated can be then forwarded into studies that can use them for real world endpoints or for a wide range of things, but it's integrating the data, not just that we have, but is available throughout. And, you know, there's lots of ways that this can work with, you know, their response rate, days enrolled, rewards can be earned. You can see their timeline of healthcare utilization. There's stuff for them. There's lots of prompts that can be used. Do they feel pain? Where do they feel it? Answer surveys. And I think this is also going to be part of what the future will be, which is people being able to connect. We don't have patient identifiers. In this case, the individual's their own unique identifier with their credentials. They're linking to where their data sits. It comes in and gets pushed into studies in almost real time. And then the researchers can be following dashboards about how the data is coming in. And this will allow true adaptive studies, because most adaptive studies are hampered because they can't get the data in time to adapt. But in this case, almost in real time, you can see what events are occurring and how that's going. And there's an article that's just published by the group here, and we're working with FDA, J&J, that we're working some NIH studies. So there's ways in which this is being used, but this is an example of 2 studies that were done with FDA that was just published. So in the end, you know, I want to say that I think we need to invest some in accelerating this pathway, making the conveyor belt go faster, but also reusable and pluripotent platforms that can be used for multiple studies, and the means to be able to learn both with patients in the teamwork, pipelines that don't need to be reinvented every time, and that we get the plumbing right so that it can be done. You know, when I look at what Wade and his group have done in COVID, within days, they were able to leverage the Yale EHR to produce dashboards and insights about COVID that other places are still struggling with, because the platform was poised to be able to provide that kind of rapid information and analysis, and even computational phenotypes of the patients with COVID. And then being able to work, Murat's running the group for Yale, overseeing, you know, facilitating clinical trials for COVID. And that data can then immediately run into that group as they consider, do they have the power? How many patients they have? What kind of patients are they? Or should there be trials for different kinds of presentations? And then also that data can feed in some endpoint information ultimately. So, you know, all of this can go together. I go back to like what I was saying in the beginning, which is I really think that we can be using big data and the new knowledge to bring a renaissance of knowledge generation. But we got to be thoughtful, and there's a lot of infrastructure building that needs to be done. I said at the end of this paper, this is a historic moment in medicine. There's a remarkable opportunity to promote medicine as an information science and strengthen the foundations of a learning healthcare system. Defined by the Institute of Medicine, is designed to generate and apply the best evidence for the collaborative healthcare choices of each patient and provider, to drive the process of discovery as a natural outgrowth of patient care. Drive the process of discovery as a natural outgrowth of patient care, and ensure innovation, quality, safety, and value in healthcare. Ultimately, we're doing it for our patients. And the longer we stay with the current system, the more the people suffer because we were too slow or because research wasn't done. Thank you.
Harlan, thank you. That was really superb and frankly inspiring. And I encouraged the audience to submit questions on the tab on the bottom of the Zoom link. But Harlan, I can start and also share some of the other questions we're getting. You know, you raise a lot of important issues, including how healthcare really lags behind other industries in leveraging data. You also raise sort of the commonly cited concerns about Epic, right? About EHRs, most notably Epic, in that it hasn't necessarily made the experience for patients or providers, you know, necessarily better. And I'm curious, why do you think it is? I mean, the company is obviously capturing 70% or close to it of the market in the US. And yet we all spend a lot of time complaining about the system. So why do you think, given what should happen in innovation, why is that lagging behind?
Um, I think it all depends what you're optimizing, and in a way, what your background is. I have a lot of respect for, people in tech and computer scientists, but if the DNA of your company comes from computer science, then you're about transactions, and you're about, what do your customers want and need, and who was the customer. I mean, I really blame myself for not being involved in these discussions when $45 billion was released in the Recovery Act that was going to help digitize America. I mean, I saw it as extraneous to what I was doing. And when people at Yale were talking about it, they said, we can run trials here when we digitize the data. And I kept thinking, that's not the future is not a single site trials. The future is people working together. I don't know. I was tone deaf to it. But, I think that those of us in medicine come to it in a different way. I mean, if we were to have built an EHR, we would have optimized different things. We would have been thinking about it in different ways. And so, and then once you get to a certain size in a company, it's hard to pivot, and the business model, by the way, is working really well. And you don't have it, it's not a public company, so you don't have any need to respond to the public or stockholders. And there's a big sunk cost. I mean, what's it going to take for Yale to want to switch? I mean, I can't see anybody after you spend $1 billion implementing a system wanting to switch. It's not easy to switch. So, I think there's a lot of reasons, but this is why I think we need to show the leadership. I don't want to be self-congratulatory, but I do think embedded within academia is a certain ethos and a certain value system that we need to promote that suggests that we're trying to optimize patient outcomes. We're trying to optimize knowledge generation, trying to optimize precision approaches so that each person gets exactly what they need and is empowered to make the choices that are best for them. So that's, I mean, without beating up on Epic, I just think, that we come at it from different directions.
Yeah, thank you. Do you know of a health system that has sort of taken the lead on this in terms of leveraging data in a way that can inform in real time and actually can learn in ways that other industries are doing?
Look, Charlie, this is why I dream that we can step forward and do this. It still remains, when you ask anyone who's listening, well, who comes to your mind right now and really knocking this out of the park? Like really being able to do this in a way that just knocks your socks off and everyone's beating a track to their door to figure it out. Nobody has. Now, I think Mayo aspires to be. They just hired Talamka from BIMDC, and John's, has been given a lot of money and jurisdiction to try to reshape Mayo in that way. And, we're not alone in having ideas like this, but Yale has got just because our catchment area, the circumscribed nature of the geography, the talent, and the purpose, and talent, not just in medical school, but across campus, we have the potential to be able to be that place. I don't know really. I mean, there are places that are doing good work. But even Columbia that has leading informatics thing, they're going through a painful switch to Epic. They're having trouble with access to data and so forth. I mean, we have lots of advantages here, and the data lake that we have is a real head start, and having Wade here is a real advantage. So, I want us to be that place.
No, I agree with you. And as you know, we're working with Wade and Alan Chow to leverage this.
Yeah, and Alan's great, by the way, too. I didn't mean not to mention Alan.
Yeah. Another question is, with obviously the play now by Google and other tech companies in healthcare, what do you think the impact of those things will be?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's a good end of that story and a bad end of that story. A good end of the story is actually their tools and expertise actually helps and provides us tools with which we can be better docs. So I guess the bad end is that they're unable to really let loose of their underlying business models, and that they just garner more power and information in ways that subjugate everyone else who's working within healthcare. They're also working on an EHR. Rob Califf was showing this EHR that Google's working on. And the problem is they haven't engendered trust. Their actions haven't engendered trust over time. So that's the part that worries me, is whether or not they can do this. Meanwhile, lots of good people who I like and admire are working with them now. But can their business model accommodate the values that are intrinsic to medicine, or the values that we want to promote that are intrinsic, that we think are important in medicine. And, you know, that's all yet to be taught. I'd like to think that their tools can be helpful, but I also think that small groups of people who are innovative within the confines of academic centers can do things that can set the tone and also set the pace. And so, I mean, I remain hopeful that is where the leadership comes from, because like I said, we have no allegiance to stockholders. We only have allegiance to patients. And so, you know, we need to promote that.
Well, Harlan, I know we're just about out of time. I want to thank you. This was really stimulating and powerful in terms of the perspectives you offer. And to your point at the beginning, I actually look forward to resuming us talking again. And actually, I think that's probably true for many of the members of our Cancer Center. You've given us a lot of great ideas, and really appreciate your helping us restart Grand Rounds in this new era, because I think very stimulating.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'll just say this. I think we have an amazing cancer center. I mean, we have an amazing group of faculty, and you know, for our size, you know, there's no one quite, I think, like us. And I say that because, you know, geographically we're stuck between two major cities, and yet, you know, the innovation and ideas and talent here is just, you know, breathtaking. So yeah, I look forward to working with anyone in our group, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Well, Harlan, thank you. And everyone else, have a good day.